So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, because I'm sure some of you it's the middle of the night for you. And welcome to this, our latest webinar, which we thought we would do following CSW 67. 2 weeks ago, many of us were at the 67th session on the Commission on the Status of Women, which took place against the backdrop of continued backlash against women's rights globally, from increased violence against women in the public space, to the gender impacts of the earthquakes in Syria and Turkey, to the daily horrors that women and girls face in emergency and crisis settings in Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Iran. The Commission on the Status of Women, CSW 67, is the UN's largest annual gathering on gender equality, the empowerment of all women and girls and their human rights, which eventually worked into the early hours of Saturday, the 18th of March morning, and successfully closed its 2-week-long session with the acknowledgement of the critical role of technology and innovation in achieving gender equality. The agreed conclusions adopted by the member states provide a blueprint for all stakeholders, including governments, the private sector, civil society, and youth, to promote the full and equal participation and leadership of women and girls in the design, transformation, and integration of digital technologies, and the innovation process that fulfill the human rights and the needs of women and girls. So we thought that we would do a little question and answer session with many of the ladies who probably play a prominent role at CSW, at least for Soroptimists International. So our panelists tonight are Bette Levy, Linda Witong, Pat Black, Ulla Madsen, Marlène van Benthem, and Vanessa Trays. So we're going to ask a couple of them a question in turn. Vanessa, you are in the prime space. Can you briefly explain to the people present tonight what CSW is?
Of course, Marlène. Thank you so much for having me here today. So the Commission on Status of Women is the principal global intergovernmental body exclusively dedicated to the promotion of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. The Commission on the Status of Women is a functional commission of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, one of the main UN entities within the United Nations. Do you want me to explain the difference between the forum and the
well, that's my second question to you. What is the difference between NGO CSW and the UN CSW? So it can be divided into a couple of questions. What is UN Women and what is its role in CSW? And then we'll go on to explain. So if you do the NGO CSW and the UN CSW and just explain those.
Sure. So the NGO CSW Forum is a civil society gathering parallel to the UN CSW and outside of the UN complex. It's organized by the NGO CSW, which is a civil society organization. It hosts virtual and in-person parallel events and other civil society-led events, such as a consultation day, orientation sessions, advocacy training, and conversation circles. It also gathers recommendations and prepare recommendations that they send to the UN Women and to member states. And hopefully they will take into consideration these recommendations into their negotiations. They usually publish at the UN Women website. Now, the UN CSW is the official UN commission at the United Nations headquarters in New York. The UN Women is the secretariat, so it's coordinated by UN Women. It hosts official side events organized in a collaborative manner between UN agencies, member states, and civil society. And it led us with an outcome document that is negotiated by member states. it also, we could register, and organizations that are ECOSOC accredited can register to attend, while the NGO CSW Forum is open to the public.
So what is UN Women and what's its role at CSW?
So UN Women is a body, it's an entity of the United Nations, and is the one that coordinates CSW, is the secretariat. So in their website, we could read all the documents, the statements. It also kind of managed the relationship between the forum, the process, and civil society. And is the agency within the United Nations that coordinates and CSW.
And can you explain the difference between the side events and parallel events?
Yeah, so the side events are organized by member states within the UN complex. So they happen on site. Usually they're organized in a collaborative manner with member states, civil society organizations, and other UN entities, but they happen at the site. To register to this, sometimes they send you a link, an email, and invite people to register. They might give you a day pass for that specific side event. Or if we belong to a ECOSOC accredited organization, we could register to the NGO CSW, and then we could enter the building and attend to the side events. Now, the parallel events are organized by NGO CSW, which is a civil society organization. It's open to the public. Anyone can register to these events. They use a platform. This year, they use one called WOVA, but it's a new platform. Last year, they used a different one. So they used a platform where we could access the virtual events, where we could also see the calendar of all the side events. So it's hybrid. Some of them are in person, some of them are virtual. But in this platform, we could enter this platform and see the calendar and apply in advance to organize an event. So they happen outside the UN complex, and they are organized exclusively by NGO CSW.
Thank you, Vanessa. I forgot to actually introduce Vanessa. She is one of our UN representatives in New York. Her bio is in the chat box if you'd like to know a little bit more about what she does. So our third question is to Pat Black, and Pat is an advocacy advisor, a past director. What is your role in CSW negotiations? Because Pat has been there many years.
I start work with the UK government when the Secretary General's report is published, and then follow that up with the zero draft. And with the group of NGOs in the UK, we start working together on the text, on things that we would like to see as NGOs. And obviously the SI asks are part of that. But it is a cooperation between NGO representatives right across the UK. Some of them are domestic NGOs, some of them are international NGOs that we work with in New York anyway. The UN representatives, the SI UN representatives work with organizations like Zonta International and Business and Professional Women, Graduate Women International. And so we have a good platform to start from. But I've also developed over recent years support for delegations where we have strong links into governments in the same way as in the UK. We have the NGO links into the government. So Ulla for example, has very good links into the Danish government, and Marlène, who you'll hear from later, has strong links into the Netherlands. And over the last few years, we've been able to build up a very strong coordinated work on the agreed conclusions text. And more recently, Linda Witong has done an enormous amount of research in advance, so that when we go to talk to the governments, we can actually talk from an evidence base, and therefore actually we can make our profile very strong amongst not just the governments, but the other NGOs as well, who often only work on a single issue. Some of them only look at one particular aspect of what the Commission on the Status of Women will be considering. When we're at New York, or as it has been over the last couple of years, we've had to do it virtually. We talk to individual delegations, and particularly if SI has a delegate who is a member of a country delegation, it's very helpful. So, for example, Haftis has been a member of the Icelandic delegation. Martina has been a member of the Austrian delegation. And they are very useful funnels, I suppose, for the work that we would like to see go into the agreed conclusions and be part of the negotiations. The negotiations, having started back in February, go right through to, well, as Maureen has said, right to the very end of the discussions in New York. And in fact, this year we ended up in the early hours of Saturday morning. So we like to be there to encourage our delegations and the delegations who are being obstructive to try and work on some of our asks. We don't get everything that we ask for, but we can stop them going backwards. I think I'll stop there because there's so much more I could talk about. It's not an area that a lot of people necessarily are interested in, but in fact, I've tried over the years to indicate that once the member states have agreed these conclusions, our job doesn't finish with the negotiations. We have to take that back to the countries and say to them, look, this is what you agreed in the negotiations, therefore we are holding you to account for that. But I'd like to talk about that later.
Okay, I'm just going to ask you to very quickly explain, how do you help to lift SI's voice at the international level?
I think that the SI UN representatives in New York over the years have done an amazing amount to lift SI's profile. They have constant contact right the way through the year, not just for CSW, but right the way through the year. They're in contact with the various missions of the countries in New York. So we already have the most amazing platform. I don't think people understand how strong a platform in each of the UN centres our SI UN reps give to the Soroptimist voice. And that makes such a difference when you get to New York and you're trying to work with other NGOs, for example. But it also helps with member states, because if you're saying to them, oh yes, I'm a Soroptimist, and it was lovely in the SI Europe newsletter, I think one of the delegates said that they'd got into the lift with a member state representative, did her elevator pitch saying she was a Soroptimist, and they said, oh yes, you're a Soroptimist, another one. So, you know, we have got a strong voice there, thanks to our UN reps, and working with other NGOs obviously helps that. When you're in your country, work with other NGOs who will be at CSW as well. And so you spread the voice across a wide network.
Thank you, Pat. I'm now going to introduce Bette Levy, who's one of our main UN representatives at New York. So she is one of the people that Pat is talking about. So Bette, how do you prepare for CSW?
Well, I just want to make clear, I'm not part of the SI's language and advocacy team, and that Maureen asked me to talk because I do represent Soroptimists in other coalitions that do work on CSW. So we work slightly differently than how Pat described it. But I was going to start with the fact is that as a UN rep based in New York, and all the UN reps, we work on the issues around CSW all year round. We don't all of a sudden wake up one morning and realize, oh, we've got to work on gender equality. That's what the UN reps do, regardless of what meeting we're attending. We're looking at it through the gender lens. We're trying to make sure that in whatever we might be talking to, I just attended the water conference last week. We focused on it through a gender lens. So that's a very important point that Pat made about the UN reps, and throughout our centers, many of the reps have taken on certain leadership roles. Currently, I'm the global organizing partner for the women's major group for the next 2 years, and that's a very significant role in the sustainable development world. And so with that hat on and with my SI hat on, I work with the Women's Rights Caucus, which has been around for many years. It has the ear of UN Women, it has the ear of very many member states, and we work collectively. And we've already started working on next year because we already know the theme. And the theme for next year, which let me read it to you because it's, as usual, very long: accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty, strengthening institutions, and financing with a gender perspective. So we already know it's going to be extremely controversial. So we've already begun to start thinking of position points, looking through the research, trying to determine facts, figures, data, all of that up front. So we also begin right after, I don't know how many of you, how aware you are, but the General Assembly, of course, is out of New York. And once the General Assembly meets in September, the member states go into what's called committees. There are 6 committees. And the 2 of them that we follow, the second committee, which is development, and the third committee, which is human rights, are what we follow. As soon as those meetings start, the Women's Rights Caucus, the Women's Major Group, we start meeting with the member states because that's where resolutions come. That's where they start. And so we want to get our language in very early. We want to make the points long before the Secretary General's report ever comes out. That's the first step that I do. Poverty happens to be an area I'm very, very well acquainted with, having been on the executive board of the Commission on Social Development, where that is a focus of. So, and I've attended many of the expert group meetings. So I'm feeling very secure in that. So I can put myself forward as an expert in the sense of either lived grassroots experience or learned knowledge through academic or through research. The way the Women's Rights Caucus works is we do look for experts in different areas. We don't expect everybody to know everything. we look and people sign up. People say, I am comfortable on this, this, and this. I'm not comfortable on that, or whatever. And that's how we work. We start with 1-pagers of key points, key red lines on each of the areas that we as a group have identified that we want to get through. I think that, it's really important to understand that the language is very subtle. And so we form language teams, multiple language groups that work on different kinds of language. We come together for the full document, but we work on, like I said, I'm going to work on poverty issues. And especially the one that I really focus on is intergenerational poverty, because intergenerational poverty is what keeps gender equality from happening, and women in the pay gap and all those kinds of things. So we have these groups. We also, as I mentioned, we also start meeting with member states. So that's our advocacy teams. And we do them virtually, we do them hybrid, and we hit them up in person as well. So we're ready to go as soon as the SG's report comes out. The SG's report tends to come out in mid to late December, and it is written, incidentally, by UN Women, and it is that is where the zero draft comes from. You can pick language word for word out of the Secretary General's report. And the zero draft will follow very quickly. It usually comes out around the beginning of January. It was a little bit later this year, but it usually comes out quite early. We've already, as I mentioned, we've already begun, working on next year's, but not only that, we're already in negotiation with UN Women ECA for Beijing Plus 30, which is in 25. So one of the things that these coalitions, which are very, very strong in the UN, both on the ultra-right side and the ultra-left side, maybe even a little bit more on the ultra-right side, we're never stopping. We're constantly going. So that's how I prepare.
Wow, Betty, that's quite a job. Can you explain the process? You were talking about the zero draft, but then we get to the outcome document. Can you explain the process of how this is drafted and take us through the steps and who does it?
Okay, so the process to draft the outcome begins usually late summer, early fall, and it's done through consultations at national and regional levels. This is the opportunity where you as members should be paying attention when UN Women is putting out a call for consultations. Sometimes those are in-person meetings, but more often than not, they are just online documents that you can fill out. That is how we can influence member states, and it's how we influence what UN Women will put into the Secretary General's report. So once those consultations are held, UN Women gathers all that information. Of course, they have their own research department, they have their own data department. This is their reason for being. So they're working on all of this separate and above from that. They're also going through past CSWs that might have touched on these topics. And they put together the Secretary General's report. Once the Secretary General's report comes out, there is a very, very brief window when civil society can actually influence language. And that is between the zero draft, the Secretary General's report and the zero draft. Once the zero draft comes out, it's highly unusual for us to be able to get any new language that's our language. And we never can, I want to be clear, even though I'm saying our language, we never get to put anything in. We have to have a member state who will be our champion and will put that language or will table that language, as they call it in the UN, for us. We never get any direct access other than those consultations. That's why those consultations are so important. So as I said, the zero draft usually it comes out early to mid. It was a little bit later this year. It was more like mid-January, but the zero draft comes out. That there will be the first reading of the zero draft. Readings are when the member states get together and they talk about the different paras. They talk about always, they want to say, we want a short, concise, to the point, 8-page document. La-di-da-da. We know that never happens. Okay, they go back and every government gets to either in the group they're part of or as a standalone government, they get to make comments on every word in every para. And I'm emphasizing that because sometimes you will see a government says delete she, and another time another country will say include she. So you see all of that language, and this is called the compilation text. And the compilation text balloons to over 100 pages, from regardless of how many pages it starts, because you have 190 plus countries putting in their 2 cents. And sometimes that's all it is 2 cents, as simple as the word, like I just said, she. Once the compilation text comes out, they go back into serious negotiations. Now, officially, they're called informals. You will see that listed on signs around the UN, and they are closed meetings. And the only people, who can be in that room will be, delegates. So we're not officially in the room in general. I'll talk about it a little bit more later. So after they streamline what everybody discussed in the readings on the compilation text, and Rev 1 comes out. Rev 1, in this case, went down to, I think, 60 pages. It was this year. So they're constantly reducing and trying to streamline. The UN Women does zero draft, but once zero draft comes out, it is the facilitators and the bureau, the chair and the 5 vice chairs, who determine what goes into a version of the paper that we're working on. These are all draft papers. They're actually draft until September, when it gets ratified. Even though we say we had agreed conclusions, that does not happen until the GA in September. So you just need to be aware of that. Let's see, is there anything else? Anyhow, there can be many versions. This year we went up, we didn't have that many versions. While they were really messy and not very smooth negotiations this year, they did keep down the number of versions. We didn't go to a facilitator's text. We didn't go to a chair's text. We didn't go to a UN Women text. We kept it, just within the member states. So that's how the drafts are created.
You mentioned earlier about sitting in the room during the negotiations, that it's closed. So who exactly is in there?
Okay, so who is in the room? So let me just explain one other thing. There are 45 members, although this year there were 44 members because there was that unprecedented vote to remove Iran. There are 45 members of the commission. They are the only ones who can actually vote and make decisions about it. But all 193 countries and the 2 observers have the right to be in the room, and they can make points or issues or suggestions. We've been very lucky over the years. There are certain governments that have actually given their seat up, because they're only allowed to have a certain number of seats each delegation, for their delegation. And so even though many delegations say they have CSO on their delegation, they don't give them a seat in the room. We have been very lucky. There are a number of states that actually do give them the seat. Belgium is one of those that consistently and right up front has done that. The Netherlands as well has been wonderful. We've been able to have people right in the room. Denmark also does it on and off. Some years yes, some years no, but very strong when they let them. They not only let them in the room, in some cases, they actually let them make an intervention. That's not very often. Because you also have ministers sitting in the room and the ministers want to be the ones talking. So from the member states, there's usually the ministers there on either equality or sometimes finance or whatever the topic may be. There were a lot of tech people around this year because of the topic. So that's who's in the room. UN Women is in the room, and any other UN entity that it maybe overlaps with will be in the room. They are not there to make points. They are there to clarify. A number of times during these negotiations, like UNFPA was asked to give definitions or explain things. WHO were asked, UN Women to clarify. There was a lot of controversy around tech facilitated. And so we got a lot of definitions from people who we normally would not have heard from. So they're in the room. The only civil society who are in the room, are those that their member state has given them a seat at the table. And even that, I will just share that Andrea, one of our own SI people, had a seat on the Barbados delegation, and she was absolutely left the room in tears as she was told she was not allowed to talk, speak up, give any kind of input, not even to her own delegation. She was really called on the table for that. So some member states do it as kind of like a dog and pony show to say, look, we're supporting, CSOs, but in fact, it's a token kind of thing, and it's not a real, experience. So what's happening now, because the UN has made such a big focus on youth, more and more delegations are allowing youth to come in on their delegation as opposed to civil society. So that's changing things a little bit also. What the Women's Rights Caucus has been able to do, because we very luckily have had quite a few people within the room, within those seats that their delegations have given. And we have a live document coming out of the room where we know what member states are saying in live time. And we are able to shoot back either a new word, an alternative word, or a new statement, or give them a place where they might find the same language in a previous CSW. What you may not be aware is over the last couple of years, since COVID especially, member states are only allowing CSW agreed language to be used. In the past, we used to be able to use GA resolutions or WHO or CPD, but they are being very rigid and only saying CSW. So that kind of language comes back in there. And we really have to rely on friendly nations who are reaching out to us. I mean, my chat went till 5:30 in the morning Saturday. Pat and I sat there together for very many hours, but once we both went home, we were on chats, following. So
thank you, Betty. That leads very nicely into our next one, because we're actually going to talk to someone now who is part of their country delegation. Marlène. Marlène is a real advocate for women's issues and gender equality. Marlène van Benthem from the Netherlands. So Marlène, can you explain to us tonight what the process is to reach the agreed conclusion And who decides when a paragraph has been agreed?
Well, thank you for your invitation to be here and to share my experiences. To be honest, I think that Bette has already explained the process from going from zero draft to at the end the agreed conclusions. It is at the end, of course, if no one has any more comments or stay silent, then the facilitator decides that it is first, they call it an ad ref, and then at the end of the CSW, the facilitator, the head of the chair, concludes that it is all agreed upon. I think that is a little bit the process, like Bette already explained. I don't know if it is possible to share my screen for a moment, and hopefully I can find it, because I put one paragraph to show a little bit the process on how you come from a paragraph that is with different language, and then at the end.
Go ahead, Marlène, I've allowed you to share.
I'll try. Yeah, well, what I just put one paragraph that was published in the, I think the second ref. Then you see here. Let me see where I can put you somewhere else. Well, you can see here between brackets that some countries propose that they want to have a gender transformative digital transformation. Some countries say they want a responsive or sensitive and family oriented. And it is all put in brackets, and at the end, it is the strongest one who, or the one who decides to stay silent. At the end, it is this text that stayed in the agreed conclusions. The stupid thing is, I don't.
Who actually decides when the paragraph has been agreed?
Yeah, well, it is everybody stay silent, and or it is the facilitator that decides. Then if we are all agree and no one has any more comments, then she decides or he decides that it is agreed.
And you were actually not in New York during this time this year. So
No.
How did you communicate with your delegation?
Yeah, okay.
Because I saw all of the emails that you were passing backwards and forwards to everybody who was there. But
Yeah,
it's
well,
quite exciting.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is the Netherlands is a very lucky that we have an NGO representative in the room. And we have a WhatsApp group with some, with a few advisors, other NGOs, together with her and the delegation. So I'm really online, in fact, connected with the delegation in the room. And she tells us all the time, we are now with this paragraph, this is a problem, this country wants this and the other country wants that. Do you have an advice on agreed language? We are looking for something else for us. We had a lot of discussions this year on security. And so we try to find agreed language, and I must say our champion in our Soroptimists International Organization is really Linda, because she has the possibility that if I ask her, do you know if there is agreed language in one of the CSWs before on this word, she comes up in no time with a list. And the Netherlands is so happy with her. And at the moment we have a very important role, because we have speaking rights. The Netherlands is part of Europe. Europe is the one who is represents all the countries, and a few countries are chosen to have speaking rights, and that is also what the Netherlands had. So that helps a lot, because there is also, of course, as you can imagine, a WhatsApp group between the countries of Europe. So I'm really in the middle of what is Europe doing? How can we bring in our women NGOs from the Netherlands? What we want? What do I hear from other countries? And well, I give you one example that was I loved so much. It was, I think, 2 years ago. Then I got a question I think from I don't know if it was the UK or the US, and he said, why doesn't say Europe? They have to open their mouths now and first. So I could say, well, hey guys, the US wants that you take the stage now. That it's so funny to be really in the middle of all these negotiations, but you have a lot of power and a lot of influence.
So you're part of your delegation and they have agreed the conclusions. What does this really mean in practical terms?
Yeah, well, in practical terms, in fact, the agreed conclusions, the CSW is not a resolution with obligations officially, but the CSW is based on the Beijing platform, and all the countries have committed to this Beijing action plan. So in fact, all stakeholders, they have a shared responsibility to go back to the country and take up all the agreed conclusions are in two parts. You have the preamble that is all saying we reaffirm, and this is say the why. And then you have the operational paragraph, and that is telling everyone we have to do this and we have to do that. And so that is what we have to take up, go back to your country and try as stakeholders to implement it. And we all have our personal responsibility as stakeholders. It can be industry, it can be the NGOs, and it is the government. You can take it in your own professional network also, and not only don't sit back and expect that your country will take it up. You have to make them accountable for it.
Thank you, Marlène. We're going back to Pat now. So Pat, can you tell us what were the major challenges you faced during this year's negotiation? And not just all about the outcome of the CSW, but other challenges you personally faced.
The hours of work. I mean, Betty has touched on it. You don't have a lot of choice, because if the negotiations, the member states decide to take the negotiations through the night, and you're serious about having input or following them, then you have to stay there right the way through the night. And I think Marlène was absolutely brilliant, because she was 5 hours ahead of New York. So she was in a completely different time zone, trying to track with us what was happening in New York. So that was one particular problem that we had. You have to keep going and follow what's happening. I think I said in my blog, I have enormous admiration for the negotiators from the member states who can very quickly understand what another member state is trying to do. So one of the issues that we've had this year is a number of member states trying to block moving forward. I'm not sure if Betty mentioned it, but in the second Rev 1, the chair of the commission decided to close off almost half the paragraphs in the agreed conclusions that were under negotiation, saying that there was no way we should be wasting time renegotiating what had already been decided as clear language. And Marlène mentioned the two parts to the agreed conclusions, the preamble and the operating paragraphs. and most of the preamble was in the closed paragraphs, and the chair would not allow discussion on that. And from time to time, some of the awkward member states who wanted to lose some of the past language in those paragraphs about, and as I think Betty described, things like the Beijing Platform for Action, tried very hard to get them opened up again, and therefore tried to get them taken out of the negotiations that were going on. So all the time you were trying to encourage allies like the European Union negotiators, Canada. You were trying to encourage them to accept that the closed paragraphs should remain, because we would be in danger of losing things. For example, a lot of member states, not necessarily members of the Commission itself, but a lot of other member states don't like the term human rights or women's rights being included, even though that's standard for looking at where we are with CEDAW, looking at the Human Rights Council. That, I mean, it's there in international agreements, resolutions, right across the board. So we were trying to encourage people to stay with that language all the time and then put it into the new language. And Marlène's already mentioned, as Betty has, some of the language that was coming out this time was very new language because it was related to technology and specifically around women and girls. So there were lots of times where you would feel as though you were on a helter-skelter going up and down. Sometimes you would win a particular phrase, and others, they would disappear. One particular one, which a lot of NGOs have been fighting for many years, was the paragraph on widows. In past years for CSW, we've managed recently to get mention of widows into the agreed conclusions, but right up until the last hour, we've been fighting for the mention, the recognition of widows. And I don't just mean elderly widows, we're talking about young people who are widowed through conflict, migration and all sorts of disasters. We've lost it every time up until this year, but this year we have retained that paragraph. I think that this point that Betty made about the civil society, that's been a challenge for us. I've been lucky with the UK government in that although we are not in the room, they come and report to us, come and ask us questions, as Marlène said. What shall we put in? What can we put in the text instead of this? And as Marlène says, Linda is absolutely brilliant at coming up with past language that we can help them with. There are so many countries where we could do more in building that relationship, so that we can have a stronger recognition. The area that we could do with a lot more representation, linkage, relationship with, is through some of the African countries. South Africa has always been a very good ally of women and women's rights in the past, but we could do SI's input at an early stage, again, as Betty has described, right at the very beginning, working with the South African Minister for Women. That would be fantastic, because South Africa actually holds the chair at the moment of CSW. So any link would be great. This year, I have felt The UK has been somewhat isolated. So even though they're very good with NGOs and keep us in touch, they have not been part of the EU negotiating bloc. So it's been difficult for them to find allies for certain things that we would like to see maintained. So we're having to look elsewhere. And in fact, Canada is a very good ally for NGOs. They're also very good at providing NGOs with information. I don't think it happened this year. I'm not sure if it happened this year. I didn't get involved, but in the past, the Canadians have always held a briefing meeting for NGOs every day and let them know what's been going on with the negotiations, what's been happening. I think those are some of the main challenges. I'm sure others could add more, but we certainly have not, as a women's movement, we have not got total support from governments across the globe. And we perhaps need to do a lot more in terms of finding the allies and working to support them, but also trying to find support for Soroptimists in the countries where they don't have necessarily a sympathetic government. And I know a lot of Soroptimists will say to me, but you're getting into politics here. And that is true. But we have to face reality. These decisions are being made by political entities on our behalf. We don't have to get into party politics, but we do have to make our stand for women and girls. And Betty mentioned that as a result of a stand that was taken by women across the world, including Soroptimists, Iran was removed from CS.
Yesterday.
Thank you, Pat. I think you have issued a challenge to us all. Have we lost you?
It said that you had muted me, so I took the hint and stopped speaking.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to mute you. Do you want to very quickly provide us with a summary of this year's agreed conclusions?
There's 100 paragraphs.
I just said very quickly.
So the main thing is to understand that this is the first time that there has been an agreement through CSW on technology and digital action. And that's where we have to base our way forward, because each of the paragraphs in the operating part of the document provides information on what countries have agreed to do in their own country to support women and girls in moving forward on technology digitalization. And as you know, one of our major platforms is STEM or STEAM. STEAM is STEM with A added, arts, because if you look at music, design, creative fashion, all of those areas, it's now done through technology. And it's so important that education, we close the digital gap. And it's education that will do that. And there was a lot included in there about supporting countries, least developed countries, with transfer of knowledge, transfer of skills. And they asked for funding. In fact, at one point, the Samoan delegation led out of the room in the last part of the negotiations, a large delegation of member states around the Pacific, and they were saying to the other member states, look, you're not listening to us. And they felt very aggrieved that a lot of what they were asking for to move forward in technology was not being included in the agreed conclusions. And Australia, in fact, gave them very strong support in the room on this. So it's up to us now to take that platform. And if you can do so, please try to read at least the last part, the second part of the agreed conclusions, and pick out the parts that might interest you. I mean, I would say specifically, let's look at education, skills and training. Look at the gender-based violence paragraphs. Look at health. We have an enormous amount of technology in health these days and care, where women are the major employees, major number of employees, and yet many are not being reskilled or trained to take on board that new technology. So that there is an enormous amount that we can interpret from those conclusions that governments should be doing, and that we can chase them to put into practice now they're back in their own countries. We can't afford to let them forget. We've done that every year with agreed conclusions. We've done it every year with the Beijing Platform for Action. We just let them get away with it, and we have got to hold them to account. Thank you, Maureen.
Thanks, Pat. I think we will move on now to Linda. Linda Witong is our avid researcher. If you want to know anything, Linda is the person to go to. Linda, do you believe that this year's agreed conclusions go far enough to fully protect and advance women and girls' rights and participation in STEM?
I think it's definitely a big step in the right direction. The UN representatives went on record as saying it was game-changing and bringing forward a vision of a more equal and connected world for women and girls in all their diversity. But I also have to point out that we have been at this since 1975. In 1975, the World Conference in Mexico affirmed the fundamental education, including science and technology, should be provided to all, especially women, as soon as possible, and that governments were even to provide special incentives, facilities for women to encourage their participation in technological and scientific skills. So 1975, we're making this argument. It continued, highlights were in 2011, CSW 55 focused on the participation of women and girls, and wait for it, education, training, science, and technology, including the promotion of women's equal access for employment and decent work. So we're going along in 2011, and we come to CSW 67. Others who I've had the honor and pleasure of working with have covered what was covered and language and what wasn't. We in Soroptimist, and I'm with CSW in their research and advocacy group, which is a part of the UN Women, we solicited input from not only the states, but from all of the organizations throughout the world in a survey, because we wanted to know what women around the world were thinking. And it became very helpful with the states and also with the STEM issues, because we have experts everywhere on that. With respect to the issues, I will say that they left out numeracy. They should have been included along with literacy, but the big issue here is implementation. One of the representatives said, our work does not end here, and that's correct. Even if you take the groundbreaking language that we as Soroptimists, working in partnership, and I can't emphasize this enough, with other groups throughout the world, not only Soroptimists, but everyone that joins the cause with education and STEM, for example. The ultimate success as one of the UN representatives said, is how the international community will collectively take this forward. We leave here now, let us bring the might of our combined determination to translate them into reality for all women and girls. And I think Marlene and Pat have touched on it. I think Betty is, along with other groups, working on it along with us, with saying we need to implement this, and we need to work from the grassroots to the international focuses to work with it. And so as far as, do I think it was successful? I think, well, I would say the proof is in the pudding, as we would say here. It's going to depend on how it's implemented, where it's implemented, if it's effective, or as the UN is fond of saying, concrete measures, as opposed to using escape hatches, which a lot of countries like to do, which is, well, we're going to pick and choose like a smorgasbord, what we implement and what we don't. No, no, no. This is not Burger King. You don't get it your way.
Linda, can you tell us one positive aspect of this year's agreed conclusions and explain why it is so important for this in progressing women and girls' rights?
I think there's a number of issues here, but it's the first time digital technology and innovation took center stage. And it brought a vision of how women and girls can be connected to new technologies and digital to contribute to gender equality. And it's just in the nick of time, folks, because in addition to the economy and the climate, we have a digital revolution, which is also including artificial intelligence, where we have to get the education, training, and background and support to nip biases in the bud with respect to artificial intelligence, and to educate 50% of the population to deal with all of this. As I said before, women and girls' place is in the digital revolution. It's not in the kitchen. And so to me, I think that was a huge issue. I think Pat and Marlene and Betty covered other issues that were involved, but I think that this was like a groundbreaking issue for the first time. It was center stage.
Thanks, Linda. We come to our last panelist for tonight, and that's Ulla Madsen, very well known to you all as she was the Assistant Director of Advocacy in previous years. Ulla, you were also part of your country's delegation. What part of your role did you find the most rewarding?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Well, the role I have is to be a kind of liaison between SI and the Danish UN mission, the Danish government. It gives me and the Danish Soroptimists insight, in this case, of the zero draft, as you must be well prepared. It is a great opportunity to be a first mover as an organization when negotiations start with the Danish delegation regarding the opinion and input from SI on the zero draft. They know SI well, at least from CSW 62, when I started being a part of the delegation. My impression is that they look at SI as an important NGO and partner that works at the highest UN level. They value our opinions, perceptions, and comments on the zero draft. They look at us as strong advocates for the empowerment of women and girls and how to transform the lives of women and girls in the best way possible. I feel during the negotiations that they know that I speak on behalf of almost 70,000 women. Rewarding and certainly necessary is the important and enjoyable cooperation with especially Linda, Pat, and Marlene during negotiations. The three of you really rock. I have to do like this. Being a member of the Danish delegation has extended my network considerably. As meetings before, during, and after CSW, I'm getting to know quite well the current Minister of Gender, parliamentarians from different parties, and many other NGOs and private sector representatives. In that way, I feel very privileged. Most rewarding is when we find out that one or more input from SI has been carried forward in the negotiations and even the whole way to the final agreed conclusions. So no, nothing to discuss. The work we are doing within the negotiations has an impact and makes a difference for women and girls worldwide. That I feel is very rewarding. Thank you, Maureen.
So, Ulla, what part then did you find the most challenging?
Well, the most challenging is the short deadline. We have to deliver feedback for the zero draft and the following reversions. This year, a few times down to 24 hours, which is difficult to work with due to the different time zones we are living in. But even though we managed, the reason for the short deadline is that the EU is negotiating, like Marlène is saying, on behalf of the 27 member states. And as Denmark is a member, they have to negotiate within the EU first before a final decision can be taken, which often takes time and can be a tough process. It certainly has its challenges that in so many countries, many of them with different perspectives of the meaning of language, different cultures and legislation, have to agree on a certain language and priorities. When all is said and done, there are most advantages as the EU nationally speaks with great emphasis. Another challenge is to follow the implementation of the agreed conclusion. We have talked about that. Thinking of my own country is one of the things I will focus much more on within the next year. The Danish delegation will meet again next month, and I will look forward to discussing how to plan and follow up the implementation of the agreed conclusion. Thank you, Maureen.
Ulla, that's actually very nicely finishing us up. But I just want to go through each member of the panel, and I'm going to start with you because you were the last, so we'll give you the opportunity to go first this time. Can you share with us one piece of advice that you have taken from your experience, maybe not at this CSW, because I know that you were at home as well, but even being at CSW with the rest of us here this evening? Just one short piece of advice.
Yes, I would gladly do that. Networking, you know, the word is network. And I can see that Hanne Friis Olesen is here tonight, and she is a member of SONTA. And I know her and other SONTA members very well. And it's really the former international president of SONTA, Maria Østergaard, who introduced me for the Danish delegation. I met her in the Copenhagen airport in 2018. And she said to me, well, Ulla, are you a member of the Danish delegation? I said, no, not yet. And she said, I will introduce you. So it is very important to have a network. If you don't know anyone, then you have to look up who is really a member of the delegation in your country. And you might know one of them, and then you can approach them and say, could we have a meeting, a cup of coffee? We can talk about this. And maybe you can be introduced. That is the way that she did that for me. So I'm very thankful for that. She is now, you know, the woman of the Council of Women in Denmark, just elected. So
that's actually another challenge to all the rest of us. Thank you, Ulla. Linda, would you like to give us one piece of advice of your experiences?
Yeah, I think Ulla touched on it already, but my piece of advice would be, you want to build partnerships. You want to go, when you're meeting people at the UN or outside the UN, how can you work with that organization or that state? What can we offer? What can they offer? And if there's a difference of opinion, with some organizations are going to be, is there some way to build a consensus? And I think that in many respects has been the positive in creating a lot of progress in our networking and in making a difference. And Ulla had it right too. Yeah, it takes a village.
Marlène? What one piece of advice would you give us?
Well, what I think the most important is that you get known in your own country as a soroptimist in the women network that is connected to your delegation. So, and that is the most important thing, that they know you and that you show them what your expertise is, what you can bring in. And I can remember from the first time that when I was also in this connecting WhatsApp group, that all the time I said, the experts from Soroptimists International on girls, they want you to do this. And the experts of Soroptimists International on elderly, they say that you have to do this. And then I came with agreed language, and then you get really a position. So be sure that you have a lot of back office available for all of you, a lot of expertise available. You don't stay alone, but make yourself visible. And another thing, what is important in the implementation fact is try to create a kind of fact sheet with perhaps an elevator pitch that you can, so you can help each other in your own club or in all the members in your country to look for, if you everywhere where you are, you want to say something, hey, do you know that we have an agreed conclusions and that this is important, that you really have words to tell them and to have the facts available.
Thank you, Marlène.
Can I please say one thing?
Yes, you can.
I love so much, that is that we have one very important language at the moment in it, and it is, as you all know now, the news on artificial intelligence, and that is we got the word safety by design in it. I think that will be very important in the future now.
Thank you, Marlène. Pat?
I think that people have realized that CSW is actually quite a complex area of work at the United Nations. It's taken me many, many years to get to grips with everything that goes on. In fact, we haven't covered everything this evening. So I would, and it was Betty who started me, I would give the piece of advice: find a mentor who is willing to help you in the way that Ulla's had help, willing to help you either in your country or through SI. I'm very happy to help. I mean, Betty has been an absolutely incredible mentor for me. So I want to pass that on and would like to encourage anybody who is interested to find out more. It takes a long time. It's taken me 20 years and probably taken Betty a lot longer.
Well, we'll just go to Betty then and see what her one piece of advice would be.
I'm sorry. I'm going to do two pieces, but they're very short, I promise. The first one is, first and foremost, remember that we have UN reps in 7 duty stations around the world. Soroptimists would not be in any of the places we are without UN reps and the hard work that they do, spreading UN reps, SI's reputation, opening doors for people. So I want to acknowledge all of the UN reps and the work they do. That's the first thing. CSW is a very, very small part of the work that is done at the UN. For all of us, we think it's this big major thing, but it's a tiny little drop in the bucket. So we need to acknowledge that. The piece of advice that I would give is, I worked for government for 45 plus years. I fully understand government speak. And Pat mentioned how hard it is to operate in the UN. And that's because a lot of it has to do with the language. It's a language all of its own. And so the advice that I want to give is learn to listen what's actually being said. what the message the person is trying to relay to you. When you work for government, you have the inside where you are open, and then when you're in public, you say things. But sometimes you want to give messages to people, and I'm trying to say to you, or they're trying to say to us, you can push me this way, but not that way. But we as CSOs are so set on our own ideas and that we're right, we don't listen to the messages that are being given to us. So that's my one bit of advice.
Thank you, Betty. I'm sure we'll all remember that one piece of advice. Vanessa.
Yeah, so I will have two ideas, one for before CSW and one after. The one for before, it will be to get to know where we stand as an organization, as a women. Soroptimists International have SI papers where we stand. And if we go inside the website, we could read this paper so we can have clear what are our principles and what is the message. And after that, I could easily go on Google, type Blue UN book, and find the UN representative for my organization, for my country, and then trying to get in contact with them and bring them the message that we want to bring to try to influence the process. Now for after, I will say we could have clear the agreement. We could pick up one subject, as it was mentioned about Marlène, something that interests us, and we could use social media to identify what the governments are doing in our country. Are they following what they just signed? But also for us locally to implement the ideas, those principles in our own clubs, in our own lives, in our own work, because right, we are the people, so we are the one who are implementing these ideas. So it's not only for the government, it's also for us. So for example, what are we doing in terms of technology at the Soroptimist level? What projects we have that are related to technology, which I know there are a lot. So yeah, those could be the ideas.
Thank you, Vanessa. I'm going to now pass over to Lee, because Lee has been watching the chat function, and I know that there may be some questions from you, the participants, that you might want to ask some of our panelists. So Lee, can I ask you, do we have any questions for them?
Yes, thank you, Maureen. There's one question from Monique. How does the review theme of CSW 62 fit in with the rest of the discussions?
Who would like to take that question?
Shall I do that?
Yes,
because
go
as I
ahead.
said, there's a lot of CSW that we haven't covered this evening. The Commission meets with its 45 or 44 this year members, and they run through an agenda. They have quite a long agenda to cover over 2 weeks. It's not just the negotiations. The negotiations are going along in parallel with everything else that's going on. The agenda includes interventions, as they're called, by member states. Government ministers will come along and make statements on particular themes. It might be the priority theme. It might also be the review theme. There is also then a separate agenda item which will consider the review theme, and again member states are offered the opportunity to indicate what they have done. NGOs sometimes get invited to make an intervention, make a statement on the review theme as well. So the agenda for the whole of the CSW is actually quite long and very fully packed with sessions every day. Does that help, Monique?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Beth.
It may be that at the end of the discussion on the review theme, there will be a resolution. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. And member states can submit separate resolutions to the Commission while it's meeting. They have to do that in advance, but they can also do it while the Commission is meeting. One of the most popular and regular ones that comes along is on Palestine and Palestinian women. That comes up regularly, pretty well every year. So in addition to everything else that's going on, you have this very full agenda, and which, when they meet in a very large committee room, so it means that NGOs and representatives can actually sit in the room and listen to the debate. And one of the things that has been quite important for us in looking at the negotiations is listening to what member states say in the main room in the committee debate, because you get an understanding of what their position is likely to be during the course of the negotiations. So it's another way of gathering information for the work that we do. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you, Pat. Any of the other panelists
Thank you.
wish to make a comment? Right, Lee? Okay, over to you.
That's really the only one. There was a question a lot earlier about is Soroptimist accredited, ECOSOC accredited, but it's been answered, and there's a number of discussions going on that has been answered by Betty and Linda and Pat and different ones throughout. So no actual questions that I can see, Maureen.
Okay, does anybody else have a question that they hadn't put into the chat but would like to ask?
Hi, I was just going to say thank you so much to all the speakers this evening. That was really useful, very insightful, and it's great to have the benefit of your experience. It was my first time at CSW this year, and you know, I was just wondering whether it would be good to have a CSW manual. So some of this information is in that manual, because as a first timer, one of the things that you find is that you're just overwhelmed with information and you're continually absorbing new information. And I know we had, excuse me, I'm out of breath, I just ran up the stairs. I know we had a similar meeting before we went to CSW, but I think that, you know, it's really useful to have at least 2 or 3 of these before we go there, so that we're more familiar with what goes on, more familiar with what we should be concentrating on, and just be in a better place really for the start of the session.
Thank you, Abby. I think that that's a great idea. And I know that Lee is going to increase the amount of information that's in the resource pack for next year. But we take your point in that maybe we need to hold a webinar on some of the themes earlier. Beatrice?
I wanted to thank you very much for this meeting. I'm also a first timer, as you know. And it was also for me very overwhelming. The information that we got in New York was just a huge amount, and I'm sure you know because you have been in there for many years. But to understand a little better what the outcomes were from the CSW 67, is there a website, or where can we get a brief summary with the main outcomes of the CSW 67? And I mean, a very uncomfortable question. Do you feel that we really made a little progress or not?
I see a lot of heads nodding.
Yes.
So I think the answer is yes.
Thank you.
Any of the panel wish to say anything to that?
We feel good. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't say we feel good. It's a very weak agreed conclusions, but we have learned to take the positives among all the negatives. And we try to pull out some of the language, whether it was like the safety language, the example that was given before. Those open the door for hopefully a time when the UN's not as regressive. But I would not say that it was a good conclusion.
I'm not sure that I would agree with Betty. I think the fact that we got agreed conclusions was good, because we were working right up to the wire with some very awkward member states. So I think from that point of view, there was a point where some member states were saying we would just have a chair's statement. So I think from the point of view of actually having got agreed conclusions, that was progress. I think you're right, Betty. We did also get some language in there that can be built on for the future when we are in a position to have a much larger set of allies who are part of the voting CSW, who are part of the vociferous CSW, who are our allies. So you're right there. We're building for the future. Every year we build for the future. We just don't want to go backwards, which was what a lot of member states were trying to do. So from that point of view, I'm much more positive, I think, than Betty.
I would join with Pat. I think the perspective, in some groups' perspective, it was very weak and they did not get what they asked for. In other groups' perspectives, it exceeded their expectations. And as Pat said, given all the drama that was happening behind the scenes and all that, I think that it was amazing and hard work by everyone, not just one group, but everyone, that we got an outcome document. And congratulations to all of you who worked so hard throughout the year and in the wee hours of the night to do that. So I'm positive like Pat.
I can also say that I'm positive like Pat and Linda. And I think it's a miracle that we got a agreed conclusion. And I think really the Danish delegation, we were talking about that. We have meetings every day during the first and second week. And they keep on saying we will have a agreed conclusion. Even they were telling terrible stories. So they got right at the end. And I think we got a very important step forward around the topic. So I'm really positive. We have to be.
Marlène?
Yeah, well, okay. Of course, it is a very special. It has been a very special CSW because of the theme on technology and innovation. So we had a lot of new language. So that's why we have to be happy on. That helps us to go forward. One thing we have to be very alert on, and that is that we get girls in it. And there was a moment that we were losing a lot of paragraphs where they wanted to have also access for girls in innovation or in participation. And we started to count what is happening. And if we keep in one paragraph the girls, so that is one thing we have to be very alert on having the girls in it. So,
Vanessa, do you want to say anything?
Echo some of the previous comments, and I think it's a mix of emotions and messages because governments manage to exclude certain words. However, there is agreements and there is language in terms of the development of digital and closing the digital gap for women. And as Pat said, agreed conclusions that could help locally for each government and activists in their countries, and also could help for further agreements. So it's a mix.
Thank you. Hysteria?
So first, I would like to thank you for this session. It was my first time to attend CSW, and it was really, really great. I saw some of the faces on this call, and it was wonderful. With Pat, with Betty, it was wonderful. So one thing that I noticed was that there was this great opportunity for us as Soroptimists to also connect with different organizations. And what I noticed was it would have been great if we had some kind of, material that we could have taken. I had one brochure that I prepared for Eastern Canada region, and I was carrying that around, and I can tell you that I connected with at least 40 organizations, 25 of them in Africa. And what I encouraged them was to connect with their local Soroptimist club in Africa. But I found, it is a great opportunity. We have a wonderful opportunity to also promote Soroptimists. I was hoping, I know that we have some New Yorkers here, but if SI New York would take this opportunity, this is a wonderful PR opportunity for us. And I think we can really, really make most out of it. And the second point is, if you have any Soroptimist event, I know that some members from Australia had a presentation. Unfortunately, I missed it. If there is some kind of communication that goes out, so we know when the Soroptimist sessions are happening, that would be wonderful. So thank you very much.
In relation to your last point, they were advertised on social media, but I do know that we were late in getting them up. They should have been out earlier, but that's just a logistics problem. So thank you for that. Christine?
Thank you, Maureen. So I guess we had the question how to make the most of CSW. Now we have the question how to make the most out of the agreed conclusion, put into practice, and have an actual focus on it. I guess we have a good basis, because I have the feeling the problem and the digital area is so familiar with many peoples, and of the problem of digital worlds and problems, by the way. So you can always say, by the way, step into it, and education and implementation to support women and girls in digital areas is very important. So I think it's a good basis for deepening a collaboration between and creating a cooperation between the government, the NGOs and the civil society, building a bridge, asking the governments what they are working on, what focus of SDGs is now in the main point, and then maybe we can have a connection to this and support it. And by the way, so I want to mention that this year will be the 30th anniversary of the Human Rights Congress, which was established in 1993 in Vienna. So we will have the anniversary. So it's another level of human rights and the status of women and girls and gender equality to cooperate between the NGOs and the government, which will be a big celebration in Vienna. So this is just an example how to introduce ourselves again and how to focus on what is the agreed conclusion. And by the way, we have a lot of Soroptimists on the basis. They should also be aware what we had done in New York and what was the output. And I thank all of you and Betty and all of your presentations, because it was again great, not only for us, and we should really transport and implement it to our Soroptimists as well at the basis. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Anyone else before we close the session?
Well, yeah, of course, Maureen,
Yes, Maureen?
I like to invite everyone to join the Soroptimist Lab so we can continue our discussion over there and make ourselves wiser on the CSW, sharing knowledge. And
okay.
I can post there a lot of information so you can take it up.
I just want to close with what the UN Women Executive Director, Simba Babous, at the conclusion of the negotiations said. She said, this year's agreed conclusions are game-changing and bring forward our vision of a more equal and connected world for women and girls in all their diversity. It is our job as we leave here today to translate them into reality. The ultimate success of these agreed conclusions lie beyond their finalization in CSW. It's in how we will collectively take them forward. They bring us a vision of a more equal world. Let us translate them into reality for all women and girls. And I think that was the message that each and every one of our panelists gave you this evening. The work now is in our hands. It is in our hands to negotiate, to go to our governments, to ask the questions, to find out what they are actually doing in relation to these agreed conclusions, and to keep on asking. But if you do that, can I also say to you that we need to know about it? So we want to know what you're doing, and I'm sure the UN representatives would like to know what you are doing. So our work is not finished, and we must continue to work to improve the lives of women and girls. And I know that as Soroptimists, we will find a way and we will make it happen. I would like to thank everybody who went to CSW. I think they all enjoyed themselves, at least with having the WhatsApp group. And there was great information sharing. There was great joy sharing. There was great trip sharing. And I also would want to say a real big thank you to our panelists here tonight, to Betty, to Linda, to Pat, to Ulla, to Marlène and Vanessa, because I couldn't have done this without you.